I'm Yuki Tanaka, 29, and 3 months ago I received a call that shattered my world. Mrs. Tanaka, your husband, Hiro, died a hero at the Hiroshima Memorial, the voice said. He saved over 100 people from a catastrophic radiation leak before succumbing to exposure himself. I thought I was a widow mourning my husband's tragic death at our city's most sacred site. But when I arrived at the memorial that night, I uncovered a web of lies that went deeper than I ever imagined. The man they said was my hero wasn't my husband at all, and the real truth about what happened at Hiroshima would expose a conspiracy that threatened everything I believed about our marriage. Before we jump back in, tell me where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you. Make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Like this video if you've ever discovered that your entire life was built on a lie. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was translating a technical manual for a German engineering firm. My small home office overlooked the Peace Gardens, and I could see the memorial dome in the distance, a view that had once brought me comfort but now felt like a constant reminder of loss. Hiro and I had been married for 3 wonderful years. We met at a conference where I was translating for international safety inspectors, and he was presenting on nuclear facility protocols. He had this way of making complex technical concepts sound simple, and when he smiled, his whole face lit up. You make my broken English sound like poetry, he'd told me after my translation of his presentation received applause. Our wedding album sat on my desk, pages worn from countless viewings during these lonely months. There we were at Miyajima Island, traditional clothes against the famous Torii Gate, both of us laughing at something the photographer had said. Hiro looked so handsome in his formal kimono, and I remembered feeling like the luckiest woman alive. We lived in a modest apartment in Nakaku, close enough to the memorial that we could walk there on Sunday mornings. Hiro worked as a safety engineer for what he called government infrastructure projects. He'd leave early each morning with his silver briefcase, always impeccably dressed in his dark suit and tie. Safety first, beauty second, he'd joke, straightening his tie in our hallway mirror. I specialized in technical translations, German to Japanese, English to Japanese, sometimes Korean. The work was steady and allowed me to work from home, which Hiro preferred. I like knowing you're safe, he'd say, kissing my forehead before leaving for work. The world can be dangerous for someone as trusting as you. Looking back now, I realize how little I actually knew about his daily life. He'd come home with stories about meetings and inspections, but they were always vague, classified, he'd say, with a wink when I asked for details. Government work, you know how it is. I trusted him completely, never thinking to question why. His work seemed so secretive that last morning, Hiro had been different. He'd held me longer than usual, his embrace almost desperate. Yuki, he'd whispered against my hair, if anything ever happens to me, remember that I love you more than life itself. I'd laughed and pushed him away playfully. Don't be so dramatic, it's just another safety inspection. He'd paused at the door, his hand on the handle, looking back at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between sadness and fear. Promise me something, he'd said. Promise me you'll remember the good times, not whatever else you might hear. I'd been confused by his words, but I'd promised anyway. How could I have known that within hours, my husband would be dead, and that promise would become the most important words I'd ever spoken? The man in our wedding photos was smiling, but now I wonder, was even that smile hiding something from me? The memorial service was held at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Hall, its solemn atmosphere heavy with the weight of history and fresh grief. Government officials in black suits lined the front rows, their faces appropriately grave as they prepared to honor my husband's heroic sacrifice. I sat in the front row, dressed in the traditional black mourning kimono that had belonged to my grandmother. The fabric felt suffocating against my skin, but nothing compared to the suffocating weight of loss that pressed down on my chest with each breath. Director Yamamoto from the Memorial Foundation took the podium first. He was a thin man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses that caught the light as he spoke. Hiro Tanaka died as he lived, putting others before himself, he announced to the gathered crowd. When the radiation containment system failed during routine maintenance, he could have fled to safety. Instead, he stayed behind to manually evacuate over 100 visitors and staff members. The story sounded heroic, noble even. But as I listened, something nagged at me. I'd visited the memorial countless times with Hiro, and I'd never seen any radiation containment systems that required the kind of maintenance he described. The memorial was exactly that, a memorial, not an active nuclear facility. Next, several survivors took the podium to share their stories. Mrs. Sato, an elderly woman with trembling hands, described how Hiro had carried her to safety when her legs gave out. He was like an angel, she said, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. So calm, so strong. He kept saying, "Don't worry, I'll get you out of here." Then came Mr. Ogawa, a middle-aged businessman who claimed Hiro had guided him through smoke-filled corridors. "Without him, I would have died," he testified. He knew exactly where to go, like he'd planned every step. That phrase stuck with me, like he'd planned every step. What an odd thing to say about someone responding to an emergency. The final speaker was a young mother, named Mrs. Ishida, who said Hiro had helped her find her lost daughter in the chaos. Her story was the most detailed, describing how Hiro had somehow known exactly where to look. "It was miraculous," she said. "He went straight to the gift shop storage room where she was hiding." How did he know? How did he know? Indeed, the coffin remained closed throughout the entire ceremony, which the officials explained was necessary due to the radiation exposure. "The body is too damaged," Director Yamamoto had told me privately. "It would be traumatic for you to see him in that condition." At the time, I'd been grateful for their consideration. When they handed me the official death certificate, I noticed something strange. The document listed the cause of death as acute radiation syndrome, but it also included details about the condition of the body that seemed inconsistent. According to the medical examiner's notes, there were no burns or typical signs of radiation exposure. Instead, it mentioned blunt force trauma to the head. I questioned Dr. Matsui, the medical examiner, about this discrepancy. He seemed nervous, adjusting his glasses repeatedly as he explained. "Sometimes radiation affects the body in unexpected ways," he said. "The trauma could have occurred during the collapse of the containment structure, but I'd asked Director Yamamoto about structural damage, and he'd assured me there had been none. The containment failure was described as a leak, not a collapse." Their stories weren't adding up. As mourners filed past to offer condolences, I kept thinking about that phrase, like he'd planned every step. The more I replayed the survivors' testimonies, the more they sounded rehearsed, practiced. And why were all these people so eager to speak at the funeral of a man they'd supposedly just met during a crisis? 3 nights after the funeral, I couldn't sleep. The questions swirling in my mind were like restless spirits, demanding answers I didn't have. At midnight, I dressed quietly and walked to the Hiroshima Peace Memorial, needing to see the place where my husband had supposedly died. The memorial grounds were eerily peaceful under the moonlight. The eternal flame flickered in the distance, and the dome stood silhouetted against the night sky like a haunting reminder of devastation and loss. I'd expected the area where the radiation leak occurred to be cordoned off, marked with warning signs or cleanup equipment. Instead, everything looked completely normal. I was examining the main building when I heard footsteps on the gravel path behind me. An elderly man approached, wearing the uniform of a groundskeeper. His face was weathered by years of outdoor work, and his eyes held a kindness that reminded me of my grandfather. "You're Mrs. Tanaka," he said softly. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I'm sorry if I shouldn't be here. I just needed to see." "You needed to see where your husband died," he finished for me. "I understand. I'm Watanabe. I've been the night groundskeeper here for 23 years. Then you were here when it happened. The radiation leak." His expression grew troubled. "Mrs. Tanaka, I was here that entire day. I saw everything that happened, and I've been carrying the weight of it ever since." My heart began to race. "What do you mean?" "There was no radiation leak," he said quietly, glancing around to make sure. "We were alone. Nothing like what they described in the newspapers or at the funeral. That day was like any other tourists. School groups, the usual peaceful atmosphere. I felt dizzy. But the emergency response, the evacuation." "There was no evacuation," Watanabe interrupted gently. "Mrs. Tanaka, I've worked at nuclear facilities before coming here. I know what a radiation emergency looks like. There were no radiation detectors going off, no emergency protocols activated, no hazmat teams, nothing." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something that made my blood freeze. It was Hiro's security badge, the one he wore to work every day. But this wasn't the badge I'd seen him wear. This one had a company name I'd never heard of: Sakura Environmental Solutions. "I found this near the cenotaph that morning," Watanabe said. "Your husband dropped it, I think, when he was talking to those men in suits. What men? 3 of them, wearing expensive suits. They met your husband here early that morning, around 6 a.m. I was doing my morning rounds and saw them talking quietly by the monument. Your husband seemed agitated, kept shaking his head like he was refusing something. Then one of the men handed him an envelope, and your husband walked away looking defeated. I stared at the security badge in my trembling hands. Sakura Environmental Solutions. Hiro had told me he worked for the Department of Nuclear Safety, not some private company I'd never heard of. Why would he lie about something so basic? Mrs. Tanaka, Watanabe said gently, I think your husband was in some kind of trouble, and I don't think he's dead. The words hit me like a physical blow. What do you mean? I've seen the man they say died here. The body they showed in the photographs, for identification. That wasn't your husband. I would recognize him. He came here often, sometimes alone, always looking troubled. The man in those photos was younger, thinner, a complete stranger. I spent the next morning staring at the security badge, trying to make sense of what Watanabe had told me. Sakura Environmental Solutions, a company I'd never heard my husband mention once in 3 years of marriage. I decided to investigate. Starting with a simple internet search. The company's website looked professional enough, featuring stock photos of environmental cleanup crews and vague descriptions of specialized containment services. But when I looked closer, something felt off. The About Us section was filled with generic corporate speak, and the projects page showed only broad categories without specific examples. Most telling of all, the Our Team section was completely empty, claiming to be under construction despite the site appearing fully operational. I called the main number listed on the website. A pleasant female voice answered, Sakura Environmental Solutions, how may I help you? Hello, I'm trying to reach someone about my husband's work there. His name is Hiro Tanaka. There was a pause. I'm sorry, could you repeat that name? Hiro Tanaka. He's a safety engineer with your company. Ma'am, I'm going to transfer you to our personnel department. The line went quiet for nearly 5 minutes before a gruff male voice came on. This is Director Harada. You're asking about Hiro Tanaka. Yes, he's my husband. He works for your company as a safety engineer. Ma'am, I've been with this company for 8 years, and I can assure you we have no employee by that name. Perhaps you're thinking of a different company. My hands began to shake. That's impossible. I have his security badge right here with your company name on it. Security badge. His tone became sharp, almost aggressive. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to bring that badge to our offices immediately. We have strict policies about company property. Something in his voice frightened me. I'll have to call you back. I hung up quickly and stared at the badge again. If Hiro didn't work for Sakura Environmental Solutions, then how did he have their security badge? And why did Director Harada seem so concerned about me having it? I decided to visit their offices in person, but I wouldn't announce myself first. The address led me to a modern office building in the business district, about 20 minutes from our apartment. Sakura Environmental Solutions was listed on the directory as occupying the entire 15th floor. I took the elevator up and found myself facing a sleek reception area with the company logo prominently displayed. The same pleasant-voiced woman from the phone sat behind the desk, but when I approached, her smile faltered slightly. I called earlier about my husband, Hiro Tanaka, I said. I'd like to speak with Director Harada. Before she could respond, a door opened and a heavy-set man in his 50s emerged. This had to be Harada, his eyes immediately fixed on my purse, where I'd tucked the security badge. Mrs. Tanaka, thank you for coming. Do you have the badge? I pulled it out, and his expression grew intense. Where exactly did you find this? At the Peace Memorial. But I want to know why my husband had it if he didn't work here. Harada examined the badge closely, then looked up at me with an expression I couldn't read. Mrs. Tanaka, this badge was reported stolen 3 months ago from one of our secure facilities. If your husband had this, then he was involved in something illegal. That's impossible. Hiro would never. Ma'am, this badge provides access to restricted areas of nuclear waste storage facilities. Someone with this badge could have caused serious environmental damage, or worse. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. I think you need to speak with someone who knew your husband better than you think you did. The business card was simple white stock with black lettering. Kenji Nakamura, private investigator. Below it was a handwritten note. Your husband hired me 6 months ago. We need to talk. That evening, I couldn't stop staring at the private investigator's business card. Kenji Nakamura. The name felt familiar somehow, but I couldn't place where I'd heard it before. My hands trembled as I dialed his number. Nakamura Investigations. A gravelly voice answered. This is Yuki Tanaka. I believe you knew my husband. Mrs. Tanaka, I've been expecting your call, though I hoped it would come under better circumstances. We need to meet in person. What I have to show you isn't safe to discuss over the phone. We arranged to meet at a small cafe in Oshibacho, away from the touristy areas near the memorial. When I arrived, I spotted him immediately, a thin man in his 60s, with silver-streaked hair and sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything around him. He'd chosen a corner table with clear sightlines to all entrances. Thank you for coming, he said as I sat down. Before we begin, I need you to understand that what I'm about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about your husband. I nodded, though my stomach was churning with dread. Nakamura reached into a leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila folder. Your husband hired me 6 months ago because he suspected someone was following him. He was right to be paranoid. He opened the folder and showed me the first document, a passport I'd never seen before. The photo was unmistakably Hiro, but the name read Hiroshi Nakamura, not Hiro Tanaka. My maiden name was Sato, so when we married, I'd taken his surname without question. But according to this passport, his real surname was Nakamura, not Tanaka. That's my family name, the investigator said quietly. Hiroshi is my nephew, my brother's son. The cafe seemed to spin around me. Your nephew. My brother died 15 years ago in a car accident. Hiroshi was 21 then, fresh out of university with a degree in nuclear engineering. After the funeral, he disappeared. I've been looking for him ever since. I stared at the passport, noting the stamps from countries I'd never heard Hiro mention: Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, Singapore, Monaco. He told me he'd never traveled outside Japan. Another lie. Nakamura flipped through more documents. Look at these bank statements. The papers showed account activity from UBS Bank in Zurich. Deposits ranging from $50,000 to $500,000 appeared monthly, with occasional withdrawals of smaller amounts. The account balance showed $2.3 million as of last month. Where did this money come from? I whispered. That's what your husband hired me to find out. He suspected he was being blackmailed, but he couldn't remember why. Hiroshi came to me 3 months before his supposed death, claiming he'd lost chunks of his memory. He said he'd wake up sometimes in hotel rooms with no recollection of how he got there, with briefcases full of cash he couldn't explain. Nakamura showed me the next item, a hidden compartment key. He gave me this and told me if anything happened to him, I should give it to his wife. He said you'd know what it opened. I'd never seen the key before, but something about its unusual, octagonal shape triggered a memory. Our apartment had a traditional Japanese writing desk that had belonged to Hiro's grandfather, or so he'd claimed. I'd always assumed it was a family heirloom, but I'd never examined it closely. There's more, Nakamura continued. Hiroshi wasn't just being blackmailed. He was actively involved in money laundering for a criminal organization. But here's the strangest part. According to my investigation, they were using him as an unwilling participant. Someone was drugging him, controlling his actions, then wiping his memory afterward. That's impossible, is it? Think about it, Mrs. Tanaka. Did your husband ever have periods where he seemed different? Times when he'd come home exhausted with no memory of his day, unexplained trips or late nights at work. The more I thought about it, the more I realized there had been signs. Hiro would sometimes return home disoriented, claiming his work had been particularly stressful. He'd developed a habit of checking and rechecking locks, as if he was afraid of something. And there were those nights when he'd wake up screaming from nightmares he couldn't remember. I raced home with the octagonal key, my mind reeling from Nakamura's revelations. Our apartment felt different now, like I was seeing it through new eyes. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every personal item now carried the weight of potential deception. The writing desk sat in our bedroom corner, where Hiro used to pay bills and handle our modest finances. It was a beautiful piece, wood with intricate carvings and multiple small drawers with brass handles. I'd always admired its craftsmanship, but never examined it closely out of respect for what I thought was his family heritage. I ran my hands along the desk's surface, looking for anything that might accommodate the unusual key. After 20 minutes of searching, I found it a small octagonal indent, hidden beneath the desk's main surface, almost invisible unless you knew where to look. The key turned icily, and a hidden panel slid open with a soft click. Inside was a world I never knew existed. Swiss bank statements showing not just the account Nakamura had mentioned, but 3 additional accounts across different banks. The total was staggering. Over $8 million spread across 4 accounts. There were also documents in languages. I couldn't read what looked like German and Russian contracts with official seals and signatures, but it was the next document that made my blood run cold. A Swiss bank statement dated just 1 week ago showed a withdrawal of $50,000 from an ATM in Osaka. The transaction had occurred 4 days after Hiro's funeral. My dead husband had withdrawn money from his bank account after his own memorial service. There was also a letter, written in Hiro's handwriting, addressed to me. My dearest Yuki, if you're reading this, then my worst fears have come true. I can't remember writing this letter, just as I can't remember most of what I've done. For the past 2 years, something is happening to me, something that makes me lose time and wake up in places I don't recognize. I've been moving money, signing documents, meeting people all without any memory of doing so. Someone is controlling me, using me, and I don't know how to stop it. The only thing I remember clearly is loving you. Whatever else you discover about me, please remember that my love for you was the only real thing in this nightmare. If I disappear, don't trust anyone, especially not the authorities. They're involved somehow. Trust only Nakamura, he's the only one trying to help me. Your loving husband, Hiroshi. The signature was definitely his, but seeing his real name written in his own hand felt like a betrayal. I'd spent 3 years married to a man whose real name I didn't even know. My phone rang, making me jump. Nakamura's number appeared on the screen. Mrs. Tanaka, I've been monitoring the bank accounts your husband asked me to watch. There's been activity on the Swiss account. Someone withdrew cash in Osaka 3 hours ago. I know, I found the statements. Nakamura-san, if Hiroshi is alive, why hasn't he contacted me? Because whoever is controlling him doesn't want him to. But Mrs. Tanaka, there's something else. I've been tracking the money trail, and I think I know who's behind this. The deposits into his accounts all trace back to a charity organization called the Japan Disaster Relief Foundation. That sounds legitimate. It would be, if it actually existed. The foundation is a front for something much more sinister. And Mrs. Tanaka, I believe your husband's fake death was just the beginning of a much larger plan. 3 days later, while searching through more hidden documents, I found something that shattered what remained of my world. A bundle of love letters tied with a red ribbon, hidden in the very back of the secret compartment. The letters were written in Hiro's careful handwriting, but they weren't addressed to me. My dearest Akane. The first letter began, I count the days until I can hold you again. These separations are becoming unbearable. But I know our situation requires patience. Soon we'll be free to live openly as husband and wife, without the need for these elaborate deceptions. Husband and wife. The words hit me like a physical blow. I read on with trembling hands. I know the past 5 years have been difficult, with me traveling so much for work and unable to explain why. But everything I'm doing is for us, for our future together. The money we're accumulating will allow us to disappear completely, start fresh somewhere no one knows us. 5 years. I'd only been married to Hiro for 3 years, which meant he'd been with this Akane woman before me, during our marriage, and apparently after. The letters detailed an intimate relationship spanning years, with references to shared memories, private jokes, and future plans that didn't include me at all. The most recent letter was dated just 2 weeks before his supposed death. Akane, my love, I fear our time is running short. They're closing in on me, and I can feel their control tightening. If something happens to me, remember that everything in the Osaka apartment belongs to you. Use the money to start over. Forget about me. Find someone who can give you the normal life you deserve. I'm sorry for dragging you into this nightmare. All my love. Hiroshi. Osaka apartment. Not only had my husband been living a double life with another woman, but he'd maintained a separate residence I knew nothing about. I found the address written on the back of one of the letters. April 15, 22 Namba, Osaka, Unit 1204. The train ride to Osaka felt like traveling through a fever dream. Every familiar landscape passing by the window seemed foreign now, as if I was seeing Japan through the eyes of a stranger. Who was I? Who had I been married to? Was anything about my life real? The apartment building was modern and expensive, the kind of place that required significant income to afford. I used the spare key that had been hidden with the letters, my heart pounding as I turned it in the lock of Unit 1204. The apartment was beautiful, spacious, elegantly furnished, and obviously lived in. But it wasn't the luxury that shocked me, it was the photos. Pictures of Hiro and a beautiful woman with long black hair covered every surface. They were at restaurants, on vacation, at festivals, looking every inch the happy couple. The woman Akane was stunning, with delicate features and a bright smile that radiated genuine happiness. In every photo, Hiro looked relaxed and content in a way I'd rarely seen. I was studying a wedding photo when I heard a key in the lock. A woman entered, chatting on her phone. "I'll pick up dinner on my way home. Mama, Hiroshi should be back from his business trip tomorrow." And she stopped mid-sentence when she saw me. This was Akane, in person. She was even more beautiful than in the photographs, but right now, her face showed the same shock and confusion I was feeling. "Who are you?" she demanded, switching to a defensive posture. "What are you doing in my apartment?" "Your apartment? I'm Yuki Tanaka, Hiroshi's wife." Her face went pale. "That's impossible. I'm his wife. We've been married for 5 years." We stared at each other in stunned silence, both of us holding pieces of the same broken puzzle. Finally, Akane sank into a chair, her phone forgotten. "The Flory told me about you," she whispered. "He said you were part of his cover story, that the marriage was fake, arranged by his handlers to make him look more normal. He said you didn't know about his real work." "What real work?" Akane and I spent the next hour comparing our stories, and with each revelation, the scope of Hiroshi's deception became clearer. She pulled out a laptop and showed me files I'd never seen before, encrypted documents that she said Hiroshi had given her for safekeeping. "He was terrified these last few months," Akane explained as she opened the files. "He kept saying someone was controlling his mind, making him do things he couldn't remember. He gave me this encrypted drive and made me promise to only open it if something happened to him. The USB drive contained a digital maze of criminal activity that made my head spin. Spreadsheets showed money transfers from disaster relief funds across Asia funds meant for tsunami victims, earthquake survivors, and families affected by nuclear accidents. The money was being systematically diverted through a network of shell companies and eventually funneled into private accounts." "Look at this," Akane said, pointing to a document titled Hiroshima Memorial Funding Fraud. It showed that over the past 3 years, nearly $12 million meant for memorial maintenance and victim support had been stolen and redistributed to accounts controlled by something called the Pacific Rim Recovery Consortium. But it got worse. The files revealed that Hiroshi hadn't been working alone. There were detailed records of at least 20 other men and women across Japan, all with similar profiles: nuclear engineers, safety inspectors, and disaster relief coordinators who'd been recruited, controlled, and used to facilitate this massive fraud operation. "They were drugging them," Akane said quietly, showing me medical records hidden in the files. "Some kind of advanced psychoactive compound that made them highly suggestible while blocking memory formation. The victims would carry out complex tasks, signing documents, transferring funds, meeting contacts with no recollection afterward." The medical files included Hiroshi's own blood work, showing traces of a substance called memory null in his system. The drug's effects were terrifying: complete compliance during the active period, followed by total amnesia about the controlled actions. "How did they get him to take the drug?" I asked. "They didn't have to force him. Look at this." She showed me a document that made my stomach drop. It was a medical prescription for anxiety medication, prescribed by Dr. Kenji same doctor who'd signed Hiroshi's death certificate. The doctor was in on it. Not just the doctor. Look at the full network diagram. The organizational chart showed connections that reached into the highest levels of government. Director Yamamoto from the Memorial Foundation was listed as a regional coordinator. Several officials from the Nuclear Safety Department were marked as compromised assets. Even some of the police investigators who'd handled Hiroshi's case were shown as paid collaborators. "This is massive," I whispered. "How many people knew?" "Too many to prosecute easily, which is why they needed to eliminate the evidence," Akane said. Hiroshi wasn't just a victim, he was the only one who'd started to remember. The memory null was losing its effectiveness on him. He was becoming dangerous to their operation. She clicked on another file labeled Termination Protocols. It contained detailed plans for eliminating compromised assets, including a specific section about Hiroshi titled Memorial Hero Exit Strategy. They planned his fake death months in advance, Akane continued. The radiation leak story, the closed casket funeral, even the testimonials from survivors, it was all scripted. They needed him to disappear in a way that would make him a hero, preventing anyone from investigating too deeply. But if he's supposed to be dead, then who withdrew money from his account last week? Akane's expression grew troubled. That's what scares me. I think they're still using him somehow. The drug protocol mentions something called post-termination asset utilization. They might have found a way to keep controlling him even after his official death. We have to find him, I said. I've been trying, but Yuki, if they're still controlling his mind, then the man we find might not be the Hiroshi either of us knew. Armed with the evidence from Hiroshi's encrypted files, Akane and I decided to confront the medical examiner who'd signed the death certificate. Dr. Matsuda worked at Hiroshima General Hospital, and according to the documents, he'd been receiving monthly payments from the Pacific Rim Recovery Consortium for over 2 years. We waited for him outside the hospital after his shift ended, hoping to catch him alone. Dr. Matsuda was a nervous man in his 50s who looked like he hadn't slept well in months. When he saw us approaching, his face went white. "Dr. Matsuda," I called out, "we need to talk about my husband's autopsy report." He stopped walking and looked around frantically, as if checking for witnesses. "Mrs. Tanaka, I told you everything at the funeral. There's nothing more to discuss. We know about the Pacific Rim payments," Akane said quietly. "We have the records." His shoulders sagged in defeat. "How much do you know?" "Enough to understand that the body you examined wasn't Hiroshi Nakamura," I said. "But we need to know whose body it was and where my husband really is." Dr. Matsuda gestured toward a small park across from the hospital. "We can't talk here. Too many ears." Once we were seated on a bench away from foot traffic, he began to speak in a voice barely above a whisper. "The body was a homeless man named Takeshi Sato. He died of natural causes, a heart attack, 3 days before your husband's supposed death. They brought him to me and told me to falsify the records." "They threatened you?" Akane asked. "They didn't need to threaten me. They owned me already." He pulled out his phone and showed us a photo of a young girl, maybe 8 years old, my granddaughter, May. "They told me they knew where she went to school, what route she walked home, which playground she visited. They said cooperation would ensure her safety." The casual evil of using a child as leverage made me sick. "What did they make you do exactly?" "I had to create a false identity for the homeless man, making him match your husband's physical description. Then I wrote the death certificate claiming radiation exposure, even though the actual cause of death was cardiac arrest." The hardest, Puff was explaining why there were no typical radiation burns or cellular damage. "So you put blunt force trauma in the report instead." It was the only way to explain the discrepancies. I figured if anyone questioned it, I could claim the trauma occurred during the evacuation process. He rubbed his temples like he had a headache. "I never thought anyone would look too closely. Heroes' deaths aren't usually investigated thoroughly." "What happened to my husband after the fake death?" I pressed. "I don't know. My job was just to provide the medical cover-up. But I overheard the men talking about a relocation facility somewhere outside Kyoto. They mentioned keeping him sedated until they could figure out how to restore the full effects of the memory drug." Akane grabbed my arm. "Yuki, if they're experimenting on him, there's more." Dr. Matsuda interrupted. "They're planning something bigger." The conversation I overheard mentioned expanding the operation internationally. They want to use the same system to control officials in other countries, particularly those involved in nuclear oversight and disaster relief. "How do we stop them?" "You can't. They have too much power, too many connections. The best thing you can do is disappear before they realize what you know." But running away wasn't an option, not when Hiroshi was still out there, trapped in their system. The morning after our conversation with Dr. Matsuda, I discovered I wasn't alone in my apartment. Someone had been there while I slept, leaving behind evidence of their presence that chilled me to the bone. On my kitchen table sat a manila envelope I'd never seen before. Inside were dozens of surveillance photographs of me taken over the past 3 weeks, me leaving the memorial, meeting with Nakamura at the cafe, entering the Sakura Environmental Building, boarding the train to Osaka. Someone had been documenting my every move since the funeral. The photos were professional quality, taken with telephoto lenses from concealed positions. In one, I was clearly visible through the window of a Kane's apartment. In another, I was shown handling the encrypted USB drive. They knew everything, but it was the final photograph that made my blood freeze. It showed me sleeping in my own bed, taken from inside my apartment sometime during the night. Someone had been in my bedroom while I was unconscious and vulnerable. My phone rang, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. Akan's number appeared on the screen, but when I answered, her voice was shaking with terror. Yuki, they took my laptop. Someone broke into my apartment last night and stole everything, the USB drive, all of Hiroshi's documents, even the love letters. They left this behind. She texted me a photo of a note written in block letters. Curiosity killed the cat. Stop digging or join your husband. Akane, you need to get somewhere safe. They were in my apartment too. There is nowhere safe. I tried calling Nakamura, but his phone goes straight to voicemail. I drove to his office, and the building manager said he hasn't been seen for 2 days. My heart sank. If they'd gotten to Nakamura, then we were truly on our own. Come to my apartment. We'll figure this out together. I can't. There's a black sedan that's been following me since I left home this morning. Every time I turn, it turns. When I stop, it stops. I went to my window and looked down at the street. Sure enough, there was a black sedan parked across from my building with 2 men in dark suits sitting inside. They weren't even trying to hide their surveillance anymore. They want us to know we're being watched, I realized. It's psychological warfare, making us feel trapped and helpless. It's working, Akane said. Yuki, what if we're wrong about Hiroshi being alive? What if they killed him, and we're just chasing ghosts? Before I could answer, there was a knock. At my door, 3 firm, deliberate knocks that seemed to echo through my small apartment like gunshots. I crept to the peephole and saw a man in a dark suit holding what looked like an official identification badge. Mrs. Tanaka, he called through the door. We're with the Ministry of Internal Affairs. We need to speak with you about your husband's case. I didn't believe for a second that he was legitimate government. The real government officials would have called first, made appointments, followed proper protocols. This was the criminal network trying a new approach. Yuki. Akan's voice came through the phone. What's happening? They're at my door, I whispered. Akan, listen to me. If something happens to me, go to the media. Tell them everything. Don't let this story die with us. I didn't open the door. Instead, I climbed out onto my fire escape and made my way down to the alley behind my building. The men had positioned themselves at the front entrance but hadn't thought to cover the rear exit. Within minutes, I was on the street, heading toward the one place I hoped might still be safe, the Hiroshima Prefectural Library. Libraries had always been sanctuaries for me, places where information was free and accessible. If I was going to uncover the truth about the government's involvement in this conspiracy, I needed to research carefully and quietly. I found a computer terminal in the back corner and began searching for information about the Pacific Rim Recovery Consortium. What I discovered made me realize the conspiracy was even larger than we'd imagined. The consortium wasn't just stealing disaster relief funds, it was systematically manipulating disaster response across the entire Pacific region. They had tentacles reaching into government agencies in Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and even Hawaii. Every major natural disaster in the past 5 years had been followed by suspicious financial activity involving their network. But it was a classified government memo I found in the leaked documents section of an investigative journalism database that revealed the most shocking truth. The memo, dated 6 months ago, was from the Japanese Ministry of Internal Affairs to several high-ranking officials. Pacific Rim Recovery Consortium termination protocols discussed in our previous communications. The PRRC operation has become compromised due to asset degradation, specifically Subject H. Nakamura's developing resistance to memory suppression protocols. We recommend immediate implementation of the Hiroshima Memorial exit strategy as previously outlined. This operation has successfully diverted 847 million yen over the past 3 years while maintaining the public facade of legitimate disaster relief. The subject's termination should be handled as a heroic death to prevent investigation and maintain public confidence in memorial security. Post-termination, we recommend transitioning the operation to our sole contacts who have expressed interest in replicating the model for Korean War memorial funding. Classification level: Cosmic Secret Distribution, Minister Watanabe, Director Yamamoto. Assistant Secretary Fujimoto. The government wasn't just covering up the conspiracy, they were actively participating in it. Minister Watanabe was the same official who had spoken so eloquently at Hiroshi's funeral about the importance of honoring heroes. Director Yamamoto had personally handed me the death certificate. I printed the memo and was about to leave when a young librarian approached me. She was maybe 25, with short black hair and nervous eyes that kept darting around the library. "Excuse me," she whispered. "Are you researching the Memorial Foundation fraud?" I was immediately suspicious. "Why do you ask?" "Because someone else was here yesterday asking the same questions, using the same search terms, a man who said he was writing an article about disaster relief efficiency." She pulled a small piece of paper from her pocket. "He left this behind." The paper contained a phone number and a message written in Hiroshi's handwriting. "Wife, you're reading this. I'm being held at the Kyoto facility. They're trying to erase my memory completely, but I'm fighting it. The treatment schedule is Tuesdays and Fridays. I'll try to resist during the Tuesday session next week. Don't come alone, bring evidence and witnesses. Trust no officials." "When was this left here?" I asked urgently. "Yesterday afternoon, around 3 o'clock. The man looked sick, disoriented. He kept asking what day it was and seemed confused about where he was. I thought he might be having some kind of medical episode. My husband was alive, and he was fighting back against whatever they were doing to him, but he was also clearly in desperate condition, and time was running out. If they succeeded in completely erasing his memory, we'd lose him forever, and with him, any chance of exposing this massive conspiracy. I needed to get to Kyoto, but I also needed backup. This wasn't something Akane and I could handle alone. I called Akane from a payphone outside the library, not trusting my cell phone anymore. We arranged to meet at Hiroshima Station, where we could blend into the crowds of commuters and tourists. I found him, I told her when we met. Hiroshi left a message at the library. He's being held at some kind of facility in Kyoto. Akane's eyes filled with tears of relief and terror. "Is he okay?" "He's fighting the memory treatments, but we don't have much time. We need to find the exact location of this facility." We took the bullet train to Kyoto, using cash to avoid leaving a digital trail. During the journey, I studied the financial records we'd copied before losing the laptop, looking for any clues about property or facilities the consortium might own in the Kyoto area. The breakthrough came when I cross-referenced the consortium's shell companies with property records I found through online databases. A company called Therapeutic Solutions Limited had purchased a former pharmaceutical research facility on the outskirts of Kyoto 18 months ago. The property was listed as a private medical retreat center, but the financial records showed some interesting details. Monthly expenditures included payments to something called Advanced Neurological Supplies and pharmaceutical-grade memory research materials. "This has to be it," Akane said, looking at the satellite images I'd found online. "Look at the security modifications they've made." The aerial photos showed a compound surrounded by high fences and security cameras, with several unmarked white vans parked in a secured garage. It looked more like a prison than a medical facility, but we needed more than just a location. We needed evidence that would convince authorities to take action, and we needed witnesses who couldn't be bought or intimidated. I thought about the encrypted files and remembered something important. Among the financial records had been a list of other victims, the 20-some individuals who'd been subjected to the same mind control protocols as Hiroshi. If we could find some of their families, we might be able to build a coalition of people demanding answers. Using the station's internet cafe, I began tracking down relatives of the other victims. Most of the men and women on the list had died in supposed accidents or had disappeared entirely. But I found contact information for several family members who'd been asking questions. Mrs. Chen from Nagoya had been looking for her missing son, a nuclear engineer who'd vanished 6 months ago. Mr. Kimura from Sendai had been demanding a proper investigation into his brother's suspicious suicide. Dr. Sarah Martinez, an American nuclear safety inspector, had been declared missing while working in Japan, and her sister had been pressuring the U.S. Embassy for answers. I sent carefully worded messages to all of them, suggesting we meet to discuss shared concerns about missing relatives connected to nuclear safety work. Within hours, I had responses from 8 family members willing to meet. We arranged to gather at a hotel conference room in Kyoto the next morning. If we could coordinate our efforts and present a unified front to the media, it might be harder, for the conspiracy to dismiss or silence us. But first, we needed to conduct reconnaissance of the facility where Hiroshi was being held. According to his message, the next treatment was scheduled for Tuesday tomorrow. If we were going to save him, we had to act fast. That evening, Akane and I drove a rental car to the outskirts of Kyoto. Following the directions to the Therapeutic Solutions facility, we needed to understand the layout, the security measures, and the best approach for a rescue operation. The Therapeutic Solutions facility looked even more intimidating in person than in the satellite photos. High concrete walls topped with razor wires surrounded a cluster of modern buildings, and security cameras swept the perimeter every few seconds. It was clearly designed to keep people in, not out. We parked on a hill overlooking the compound and used binoculars to study the daily patterns. Around 6 p.m., we saw what we were looking for: a man being escorted between buildings by 2 guards in white coats. Even from a distance, I recognized Hiroshi's walk, the way he held his shoulders when he was tired. "That's him," I whispered to Akane. "He's alive, but he looked terrible. He moved slowly, like someone heavily sedated, and he needed support from the guards to walk. Whatever they were doing to him was taking a severe physical toll." As we watched, a black sedan pulled through the facility's gates. 3 men in expensive suits got out and walked toward the main building with the confident stride of people in charge. One of them was Director Yamamoto, from the Memorial Foundation. "I'm going to get closer," I told Akane. "I need to record evidence of government officials at this facility." I crept down the hill, using trees and bushes for cover, until I was close enough to the fence to clearly hear conversations. I pulled out my phone and started recording, hoping to capture something incriminating. Through the main building's windows, I could see into what looked like a medical treatment room. Hiroshi was strapped to a chair while technicians attached electrodes to his head. A man in a white coat was preparing some kind of injection, while Director Yamamoto watched from a corner of the room. "Subject shows continued resistance to standard protocols," I heard the doctor say. "We may need to consider more aggressive memory suppression techniques." "Do whatever is necessary," Yamamoto replied. "The operation cannot proceed with him retaining any memories of his previous activities. If the standard drugs aren't working, try the experimental compound." I kept recording as they prepared to inject Hiroshi with something from a vial labeled with warning symbols. But then something unexpected happened. Hiroshi's eyes suddenly focused, and he looked directly at the window where I was hiding. For just a moment, he seemed completely lucid. "Yuki," he called out, his voice carrying through the glass. "Yuki, is that you?" The medical staff immediately rushed to sedate him, but he fought against the restraints. "She's here. My wife is here. Yuki, run. Don't let them." The injection took effect, and his voice faded to mumbling, but the damage was done. Director Yamamoto was already barking orders into his phone. "Security breach at the perimeter. Find her now." I ran back up the hill as floodlights illuminated the compound and guards poured out of the buildings. Akane had the car running, and we sped away just as security vehicles emerged from the facility gates. "Did you get it?" Akane asked as we raced down winding mountain roads. "I got everything," I said, checking the recording on my phone. Yamamoto ordering experimental drugs, Hiroshi recognizing me, them discussing memory suppression. This is the evidence we need. But our escape had come at a cost. By revealing ourselves, we'd force their hand. They would have to move quickly, now, either to silence us or to relocate Hiroshi to somewhere we'd never find him. "We need to get this to the media immediately," I said. "And we need to contact those family members we found. If we wait until tomorrow's meeting, it might be too late." As if summoned by my words, my phone rang. An unknown number appeared on the screen, but when I answered, I recognized Director Yamamoto's voice. "Mrs. Tanaka," he said calmly, "I believe we need to have a conversation. You have something that belongs to us, and we have something that belongs to you. I think we can reach a mutually beneficial arrangement." "I'm not making any deals with you," I said. "I think you will, once you understand the consequences of refusing. Your husband's current treatment can be reversed if we act quickly. But if you continue this foolish investigation, I'm afraid the memory suppression will become permanent. The choice is yours, your husband's mind, or your misguided quest for justice." Director Yamamoto wanted to meet at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial location he probably thought would intimidate me into compliance. Instead, it strengthened my resolve. Standing among the monuments to victims of real tragedy, I felt the weight of responsibility for all the people this conspiracy had hurt. I wasn't alone. Despite the danger, all 8 family members I'd contacted had come to Hiroshima, forming an impromptu coalition of people seeking answers about their missing or dead relatives. Mrs. Chen had brought her son's financial records showing the same mysterious overseas deposits we'd found in Hiroshi's accounts. Mr. Kimura had documentation of his brother's sudden behavioral changes before his supposed suicide. Dr. Martinez's sister had copies of communications suggesting her sister had discovered something dangerous before disappearing. Each of your relatives was targeted for the same reason, I explained to the group as we sat in a circle near the Memorial Museum. They were all in positions where they could access disaster relief funds or nuclear safety protocols. They were drugged, controlled, and used to facilitate massive fraud. Mrs. Chen held up a prescription bottle. My son was taking medication for anxiety, just like you described. The doctor who prescribed it was the same Dr. Matsuda, who signed your husband's false death certificate. They have a whole network, added Mr. Kimura, my brother's supervisor, the investigating police officer. Even the psychiatrist who declared him mentally unstable before his death, they're all connected. I showed them the recording I'd made at the facility, and as they watched Director Yamamoto ordering experimental memory suppression, their shock turned to anger. These weren't isolated tragedies, they were calculated murders designed to cover up international fraud. We need to go public with this, said Dr. Martinez's sister, Sarah. I know journalists at CNN and the Washington Post who specialize in international conspiracy investigations. But we also need to save the people who are still alive, I said. Hiroshi isn't the only one being held at that facility. According to the financial records, they're keeping at least 6 other victims there. That's when Mrs. Chen revealed something that changed everything. My son left me a letter, she said quietly, hidden in his apartment after he disappeared. It contained a list of names, everyone he thought was being controlled. But it also contained something else, the antidote formula. She pulled out a handwritten note covered in chemical equations and medical terminology. He was a biochemist before they recruited him as a nuclear safety inspector. He figured out how to reverse the memory suppression drugs, but he was taken before he could use it. This could save them all, I breathed, staring at the formula. Sarah Martinez had more good news. My sister was working with international nuclear safety inspectors when she disappeared. I've been in contact with her colleagues at the International Atomic Energy Agency. If we can provide them with solid evidence, they have the authority to intervene in member countries like Japan. We spent the next hour planning a coordinated attack on the conspiracy. The family members would contact international media and government agencies, presenting a unified front that would be harder to dismiss or silence. Meanwhile, Akine and I would return to the facility with the antidote formula, hoping to rescue Hiroshi and the other victims before the memory suppression became irreversible. But Director Yamamoto wasn't going to wait for us to execute our plan. As we prepared to leave the memorial, black sedans surrounded us from all directions. Men in dark suits emerged, and I realized we'd walked into a trap. Mrs. Tanaka, Director Yamamoto called out as he approached our group. I'm disappointed. I offered you a reasonable compromise, and you chose to involve more people in this unfortunate situation. Now, I'm afraid the consequences will be much more severe. You can't silence all of us, Mrs. Chen said defiantly. Too many people know the truth now. Yamamoto smiled coldly. Mrs. Chen, I think you'll find that we're quite capable of managing multiple problems simultaneously. We've had a great deal of practice. What Director Yamamoto didn't know was that we'd anticipated this possibility. While he was talking, Sarah Martinez was live streaming everything to her contacts at CNN International using a hidden camera. Mrs. Chen had already uploaded copies of all our evidence to secure servers maintained by international human rights organizations, and I had sent the facility location and antidote formula to Dr. James Morrison at the International Atomic Energy Agency. You're making a mistake, Yamamoto, I said as his men moved to surround us. This isn't just a local cover-up anymore. You're on camera, being broadcast live to news organizations in 3 countries. His confident expression faltered slightly. You're bluffing, am I? Sarah held up her phone, showing the CNN livestream viewer count climbing past 10,000. My sister's colleagues have been monitoring Japanese nuclear safety irregularities for months. Your little operation just became an international incident. Before Yamamoto could respond, The distinctive sound of helicopters filled the air. 3 aircraft approached the memorial, one bearing the markings of the International Atomic Energy Agency, one from NHK News, and one from the Japanese Metropolitan Police Special Investigation Unit. Director Yamamoto, a voice boomed through a loudspeaker from the police helicopter. You are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and human trafficking. Order your men to stand down immediately. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. International investigators secured the Kyoto facility and found not just Hiroshi but 7 other victims in various stages of memory suppression treatment. The antidote formula provided by Mrs. Chun's son proved effective in reversing the drug effects for most of them. Though complete recovery would take time, I was there when they brought Hiroshi out of the facility on a stretcher. He was conscious but confused, looking around with the wide-eyed expression of someone emerging from a nightmare. When he saw me, recognition flickered in his eyes. "Yuki," he whispered, "are you real, or are they making me see things again?" "Real," I said, taking his hand. "You're safe now. It's over." The arrests came swiftly after that. Director Yamamoto, Dr. Matsuda, and 15 other conspirators were taken into custody as evidence poured in from multiple countries. The financial investigation revealed that the Pacific Rim Recovery Consortium had stolen over 2 billion yen from disaster relief funds across Asia. More importantly, the international attention forced a complete audit of nuclear safety protocols and disaster relief funding throughout the region. The memory suppression program was exposed as a systematic method of controlling officials in sensitive positions, with implications that reached far beyond Japan. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when the real medical examiner's report was released, confirming that the homeless man used in Hiroshi's fake death had been murdered to provide a body for the deception. This elevated the charges against the conspirators to include multiple counts of homicide. "Justice isn't just about punishment," Mrs. Chen said as we watched the news coverage together. "It's about making sure this can never happen to other families." The arrest warrant for Director Yamamoto became a symbol of accountability, proof that even powerful conspiracies could be brought down when ordinary people refused to accept lies as truth. The trial lasted 8 months and became an international sensation. Hiroshi's testimony was particularly powerful, a man describing how his own mind had been stolen from him, used to commit crimes he couldn't remember, while his identity was systematically erased. "They didn't just steal money," he told the court. "They stole pieces of my soul. Every memory they suppressed, every action they forced me to take, was a violation of everything that made me human." The memory suppression drugs had left him with significant gaps in his recollection, but the antidote had restored enough of his personality for him to understand what had been done to him. More importantly, it had restored his capacity to love and to feel remorse for the deception he'd been forced to practice. "I need you to know," he said to me during one of our counseling sessions, "that my feelings for you were real, even when everything else was a lie. They couldn't control my heart, only my actions." The relationship between Hiroshi Akine and me became a complex web of forgiveness and understanding. None of us had chosen this situation, but we all had to find a way to live with its consequences. Eventually, we reached an arrangement that honored everyone's feelings. Hiroshi would remain legally married to Akine, who had been his first wife, but we would continue to be close friends as we all worked through the trauma. The Victim Compensation Fund established by the court helped return over 1.8 billion yen to the organizations and individuals who had been defrauded. Families of the murdered victims received additional compensation, though no amount of money could truly address their losses. I found myself becoming an advocate for other victims of sophisticated fraud schemes, working with international organizations to identify and prevent similar operations. The experience had taught me that ordinary people could fight back against powerful conspiracies, but only if they were willing to risk everything for the truth. Dr. Matsuda, who had testified against the conspiracy in exchange for a reduced sentence, helped establish new protocols for verifying deaths in sensitive cases. "I thought I was protecting my granddaughter," he said during his testimony, "but I realize now that I was actually endangering all the children who would have been future victims of this system." The courtroom was filled with family members of victims every day, creating a community of people who had refused to accept official lies about their loved ones. We had become living proof that persistence and courage could overcome even the most sophisticated deceptions. But beyond the legal victories and policy changes, The most important outcome was simpler. We had refused to let evil succeed in silence. We had chosen truth over comfort, justice over safety, and love over fear. In a world where powerful people often escape consequences for their actions, we had proven that sometimes, just sometimes, the good guys actually win. 2 years later, I stood once again at the Hiroshima Peace Memorial, but this time the experience was completely different. The memorial had been restored to its true purpose, honoring real victims and promoting genuine peace. Rather than serving as a front for criminal activity, I had legally changed my name back to Yuki Sato, reclaiming the identity that had been authentic before my marriage to a man who hadn't even known his own true name. The new identity documents in my purse represented more than a bureaucratic change. They symbolized my commitment to living honestly, even when honesty was more complicated than deception. My work with the International Fraud Victims Advocacy Network had taken me to conferences around the world, where I helped other families navigate the complex process of exposing sophisticated criminal conspiracies. Just last month, we had successfully identified a similar memory suppression operation targeting agricultural inspectors in Southeast Asia. The key, I would tell other victims' families, is to remember that you're not crazy, you're not alone, and you're not powerless. The people who hurt your loved ones count on you feeling isolated and overwhelmed. But when we work together, when we share our stories and evidence, we become stronger than they are. Hiroshi had recovered most of his memories and had returned to legitimate nuclear safety work, this time with an international organization dedicated to preventing the misuse of nuclear technology. He and Akane had moved to Vienna, where he served as a consultant for the International Atomic Energy Agency. We exchanged letters occasionally, maintaining the friendship that had survived everything else. Mrs. Chen had become my closest collaborator in the advocacy work. Her son had made a full recovery and was now leading research into protective protocols for people in sensitive positions. My boy's ordeal gave him a purpose, she often said. He's determined to make sure no other families go through what we did. As I walked through the memorial gardens, I thought about all the real heroes whose stories deserved to be told, the victims of actual tragedies, the families who had fought for truth, the ordinary people who had refused to accept lies even when the truth was dangerous. The eternal flame flickered in the evening breeze, and I felt a profound sense of peace, not the peace of forgetting or pretending, but the peace that comes from facing reality, fighting for justice, and discovering that love and truth are more powerful than any conspiracy. I had learned that being a hero doesn't mean dying dramatically to save strangers. Sometimes it means living courageously to protect the people you love, even when courage requires you to risk everything you thought you knew about your own life. In the end, that was the only truth that really mattered.